Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. You know, I don't like Hollywood. I don't like the material they put out, and I definitely don't like their attitude towards black people. A lot of black folks mindlessly consume what Hollywood puts out. We oversample when it comes to being movie audiences and television viewers. Let's look at one well-known white media mogul in particular as a case study. Now, many years ago, I did a live stream, and one of the names that I mentioned at least one time was a guy named Arnon Milchan. Now, for those of you who don't know, he's a billionaire Hollywood movie mogul. Even if you didn't take note, you've surely seen his name on the credits for a large number of movies. The guy's produced over 120 of them. Everything from Pretty Woman to L.A. Confidential to 12 Years a Slave. Arnon Milchan is not an American. He's an Israeli national. And while he's been making movies for decades now, the movie industry wasn't his first career. He was making money long before he got into film. In the 1970s, he was an arms dealer for the Israeli government, and, by his own admission, a spy. One of the groups that Israel had their agent Milchan sell arms to was the Dutch occupation regime in South Africa. In fact, the white apartheid dictatorship there was arguably Israel's closest ally, second perhaps only to the United States. Both of them saw themselves as fighting against a minority that was going to overthrow their respective governments. Now, according to the Daily Beast, the Israel-South Africa relationship began to blossom in the 60s and became rich and multi-layered during the 70s. Israelis trained South Africa's elite military units, sold tanks and aviation technology to their army, and licensed the production of Galil rifles at a factory in South Africa. Arnon Milchan was part of that. Selling arms was how he made his money early. He was rich long before he got to Tinseltown. Now, he tries to plead innocence today, but the facts make it clear he knew exactly what he was doing and exactly what they were doing with the weapons he was selling them. The white government in South Africa was the original rogue state, but that didn't bother the Israelis at all. And it also didn't seem to bother them that South Africa's dictator at that time, a guy named John Vorster, had been locked up by the British during World War II because of his pro-Nazi activities. But the Israelis invited this Nazi sympathizer to Israel and gave him a hero's welcome. But Israel's support for the apartheid regime in South Africa didn't stop there. The arms that people like Arnon Milchan were sending into South Africa were not so much sold to the white supremacist regime as it was traded in exchange. Israel would supply the white apartheid regime with weapons, and in exchange, the white apartheid regime would give Israel uranium so they could build their nuclear arsenal. Again, from the Daily Beast, they made a simple deal: raw materials for technology. South Africa mined uranium and sent 500 tons of yellow cake to Israel from the mid-1960s to the mid-1970s. For Israel, South Africa was pretty much the only ones they could go to for uranium, since, as everyone learned during the Second Gulf War, uranium is abundant in Africa and has been for a long time. But the Africans did not like Israel's hostility toward black people, and the African nations with Muslim citizens definitely didn't like how the Israelis treat the Palestinians. So, with the black-led African nations refusing to give Israel any nuclear material, they happily did business with the Dutch apartheid regime instead. But Israel's support for the apartheid regime in South Africa didn't stop there. Israel had the know-how to make nuclear weapons, but they didn't have the material. The white apartheid regime in South Africa had the material, but they didn't have the know-how. So Israel gave their expertise in making nuclear weapons. As the Daily Beast reported, Israel shared its ballistic missile technology and sent South Africa 30 grams of tritium. 30 grams of tritium was enough to boost the yield for several atomic bombs. It's believed that in 1979, during the Carter administration, the white apartheid regime in South Africa tested their first bomb, though they could never have done it without the help of the Israelis, without the help of people like Arnon Milchan. The white apartheid regime in South Africa is the first and only government in the history of the world to make nuclear weapons and then point them at their own country. That is the mentality of the white supremacist. It cannot be reformed. It cannot be fixed. This was what Arnon Milchan was doing before he became a movie producer. And this is very important because, as I've always told you, the people who run the white media aren't in the business of entertainment. They're in the business of mind control. Now, at this point, the trolls, white supremacist liars, and other assorted trash will try to claim that Milchan was merely selling weapons, and besides, Israel was fighting the Arabs, and that was the only reason he did it. Their situation was desperate, etc., etc. He was a good man, they'll try to claim. He just had to make a difficult choice. I mean, it's not like you can prove that he supported the white apartheid dictatorship in South Africa. I mean, he wasn't making movies for him or anything. Well, actually, he was producing productions for them. In the biography about Milchan called Confidential, that was a title taken off the fact that he was the producer of LA Confidential. In that book, it was written that in June 1975, Oscar Hurwitz, a prominent Jewish South African businessman and architect, facilitated a meeting in Israel, the primary objective of which was to cultivate a new relationship between the two countries. The Israelis invited a gang of Dutch apartheid criminals to Israel. Why? To discuss South Africa's predicament. Predicament indeed, and what was that? It was that black Americans had been giving them hell, exposing their evil to the world. We were leading the charge against South Africa, and we were the main reason why the UN put sanctions on them because of the noise we had been making. And we turned them into a pariah state. Even their white supremacist pals in the U.S. government couldn't help them. We were the ones who made apartheid synonymous with evil. We basically made the South Africans' fight for freedom into an auxiliary of our own civil rights movement. And everyone knows there is no substitute for the moral legitimacy of the black American struggle, which is why everyone tries to invoke it. So, how could the South Africans try to push propaganda meant to counter the truth about their evil regime? Their idea was to set in motion a 5-year plan to influence world opinion in favor of the apartheid regime, and they asked Israel to consult them on how to do it. They had put together a secret group called the Club of 10, whose purpose was to do everything possible to undermine embargoes and boycotts and enhance the image of South Africa by purchasing or influencing international media outlets. International media outlets means the United States. That's what this is about. Find a way to get their hooks into American media and try to counter the truth that black people were putting out there. So at this little meeting they were having in Israel, the apartheid regime's representatives asked Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres to appoint an individual to help this plan come together. They chose Arnon Milchan because at that point he had already been doing some operations for the Israelis in regards to Iran. And apparently Milchan must have made quite the impression on those apartheid rejects, because they immediately asked for him to come to South Africa so they could get their plan in motion. Now here you have a country which was being run by a Nazi sympathizer, and yet they were being wined and dined in Israel by the Israelis, who knew full well what these men were. This only 30 years after the Holocaust. Nazi sympathizers carrying out the same policies the Nazis did, and here they were being welcomed and happily entering into a secret agreement with the victims of the Holocaust, who in fact said that they could both find common cause together. For white supremacy, there's no such thing as religious differences. So that's how Arnon Milchan got into selling arms to the apartheid regime, and how he did his part to help build their nuclear weapons program. Now here's how Milchan became a willing and eager propagandist for the apartheid South Africa regime. Before Milchan began producing movies, he started off by producing a stage play called Ipi Tomba. It was some dreck written by some white Dutch occupiers in South Africa, and it basically was some white savior crap that pushed the lie that black people in South Africa were able to get by under white rule, and everyone more or less got along, and don't believe the stuff that those angry black Americans tell you. Race isn't an issue in other countries like it is in the US, etc. This pro-apartheid propaganda was produced by Arnon Milchan. And this traveling sideshow of the damned was performed in Africa and Europe and the UK, and nobody seemed to mind. Nobody was fighting against it or trying to shut them down. That is, until they made the mistake of bringing their little show to the United States. See, we black Americans, foundational black Americans that is, we're just built differently. We don't run, not from our land and not from a fight either. So when they brought that mess to the U.S., black Americans mobilized, and we not only stopped that noise, after we were done, they had to shut it down worldwide, and it hasn't been seen nor heard from since. This was how Arnon Milchan got his start in entertainment. You don't hear about this part though, do you? Whenever the white media does their little pieces talking about him and all the movies he's done, all the stuff he's been involved in, Ipi Tomba never comes up. His past with Israel never gets mentioned. It's always buried. And on the few occasions when somebody does raise the issue, Milchan's been trying to do his own lunk-headed damage control and rewrite his own history, claiming that he denounced the apartheid regime long ago. He claimed that he had gone to South Africa one time, and on one trip in particular, he suddenly seemed to notice the poverty that the South African people were forced to endure. Milchan had been there many times, but it seems he mysteriously only recognized the no blacks or Asians signs during this one particular trip. All the times he'd gone there, but he never saw them before, I suppose. And he claimed that during that trip he went to a zoo, and when he saw one of those no blacks or Asian signs, he suddenly remembered that as a Jew, he's Asian. And he took that personally. Well, first of all, that sounds and smells like bullcrap. But even if you're dumb enough to believe him, you still have to admit that he wasn't bothered by the no blacks allowed part. He was just bothered by the no Asians part. That was the part that upset him, allegedly. So I guess he didn't know that when he went to South Africa, the apartheid dictator had been a Nazi sympathizer, and he didn't know how to read either, I guess. So all those trips he'd been taking to South Africa in the past, he didn't notice the signs until that one fateful day. And when he was selling millions and millions of dollars worth of weapons to those apartheid Nazis so that they could kill black people, he didn't know that's what they were doing either, right? And when he helped them to build a nuclear arsenal, he didn't know that's what he was doing either, right? And when he was making propaganda stage plays for them, he didn't know about that either, right? Now, is anybody buying his cock and bull story? Now, there are other Israelis who had gotten into movie making in the United States, and there doesn't seem to be any word about them being involved in selling weapons to white supremacist regimes or building nuclear stockpiles for apartheid Nazi-sympathizing dead-enders. You got people like Golem Globus. Those of you who happen to be Gen Xers or baby boomers, maybe even a few millennials, you might remember their name. They made a lot of action movies back in the 1980s. And then there's Avi Arad. He produces Sony's Spider-Man movies. Before that, he was the head of Marvel Studios before Kevin Feige edged him out. So you have these other Israelis who have also been involved in movie making, and they weren't doing the kind of things that Arnon Milchan has. So you can miss me with the excuses. Because I don't find it to be a coincidence at all that Milchan has been in bed with Benjamin Netanyahu for the last few decades. Netanyahu began his own rise through Israeli society and politics in the 1970s, at the same time that Milchan was becoming an arms dealer. Netanyahu's brother got himself killed during an armed raid in Uganda. Incidents like that are a big part of the reason why these African nations wanted to keep Israel at arm's length. These days, Milchan is trying to run for cover as his buddy and longtime partner in crime, Netanyahu, is on trial for corruption. Milchan has been giving gifts to Netanyahu and his wife for many years. And just like when he was running guns, trafficking in nuclear materials, and white propaganda, Milchan wasn't giving these gifts out of goodwill or for free. He wanted something in return. Prosecutors in Israel say Netanyahu used his position to help Milchan get an extension on his U.S. visa by contacting then Secretary of State John Kerry. That was during the Obama administration. So what they're really saying is that Netanyahu was asking Obama to help his pal get a visa extension. Netanyahu's also accused of pushing legislation to give Milchan millions of dollars in tax breaks, too. This is what's been going on with Arnon Milchan recently, but you haven't been hearing anywhere near as much about it as you should. It's been buried. I suppose the Club of 10 may not be around in name, but they certainly are around in spirit. You see, white supremacy is sophisticated. The dim-witted pot smokers among us hate that because they don't have the mental wherewithal to even understand the threat we're up against, much less fight it. So they prefer to live in denial, and they want the rest of us to join them in the land of stupid. They say dumb things like, white supremacy ain't supreme over me. Wake up, stupid. The white supremacists are in charge because we damn sure aren't. And if we refuse to be honest about the situation we're in, then we have no prayer of changing it. Now you see why I don't like watching movies or TV shows. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with you if you do, but you need to understand anti-black racists like Arnon Milchan are the people who produce the stuff you watch. A key part of white supremacy sophistication lies in its use of duality. They are two-faced and fork-tongued in everything they do. So when they present a TV show or a movie to you, on the one hand, they're looking to make money off of it, sure, but on the other hand, they want to influence what you think. This was how Arnon Milchan, who is a billionaire movie mogul by the way, made the bulk of his fortune. Now, a lot of black people think that these white media moguls want to entertain you, but it's like I've always taught you, they're not in the business of entertainment. They're in the business of mind control. And Arnon Milchan's not the only one, he's just the only one we're talking about right now. He has never made reparations, paid one thin dime, or done anything to atone for how he helped to arm a genocidal racist regime. And the Israeli government has never done so either. Now, there will be those who say that that was all 45 years ago and haven't things changed? Okay. But I wonder, has the Israeli government learned anything from their past racist behavior? Have they finally stopped trying to push anti-black agendas like the Club of 10?
The major problem of Israel is with the young generation of the black community. Black Lives Matter starts there.
I guess not. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. T. Odom, Morris Bodden, Akmal Griffith, Yolanda Sapp, and Sakina Collins. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.